Thanks for joining us after lunch. Welcome back for the first panel after the lunchtime and afternoon edition. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Sexton. I will be your moderator for this panel today. I am a technical evangelist with Microsoft here in Chicago, and my primary duties include working with local developers and game designers and helping them find success on the Windows platform, as well as teaching other technologies. And I'm also a co-founder of the Voxels, which is Chicago's Women in Game Development group. And I'm moderating a panel about privacy, harassment, and free speech in virtual worlds. We have some really great panelists here today, and I will let them introduce themselves in just a moment. So if the panelists would please go on down the line, starting with Dona and on down, then keep the introductions short so we can leave time to get to everything we need to cover and leave time at the end for questions. And please try to hold the questions until the end. So Dona, let's start with you.
Sure. I am Dona Fraser, Vice President of Privacy Certified at the ESRB, the Entertainment Software Rating Board. We are the self-regulatory body for the video game industry, so I'm sure if not all of you, most of you in this room have seen our ratings, E, M, T, et cetera, on box packaging. We have a privacy certified program, which is a seal certification program for the video game industry with regards to compliance with privacy, online laws, and best practices.
My name is Greg Boyd. I was just up here for a couple hours. I'm sorry. You have to do it again. And I'm one of the two people that run the video game group at Frankfurt Kurnit. And I will also say, and I've conservatively done 100 video game conference panels. This is the only time I've ever been outnumbered by women on the panel. No one is more excited about it than me.
And they put them right in the middle.
Go ahead.
My name's Lydia Picknell. I was on one of the panels earlier today. I am the owner of Paradigm, who were the European Smite champions last year. And I'm also the coach for Avant Garde out of Australia. I'm the only female coach of a MOBA at a professional level right now.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. And over the course of the hour, I'd like us to cover some of the relevant legislation and litigation pertaining to our panel for the lawyers in the room, the business practices of how those laws and cases are enforced for the businessmen in the room. And I would also like to talk about the players themselves, how they're affected, and what further protections they would like to see from all of us, from all the gamers in the room. And if we could tie it back into how do we make harassment stop, and if that's possible, just what can we do in the future? So let's start with Dona. Would you be willing to elaborate on what is COPPA and what is it for us?
So COPPA is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. It was enacted in 1998, and it basically, the shortest summary of it means that if you want to engage an under 13 user on your website or mobile app with regards to collecting their data, before you can do that, you have to obtain verifiable parental consent. There are obviously some exceptions with the law, but essentially if you want to collect their data, use it for anything outside of internal disclosures and internal notices like newsletters, you would need to obtain verifiable parental consent.
And Dona, why is it COPPA and not COPA? Why is it not potato? Why don't you let these folks know why it's COPPA?
So COPA, C-O-P-A, was a children's online law with regards to online pornography that was eventually deemed unconstitutional by the court. So when you hear people say COPA, it's not the same as COPA. COPA is actually an existing law. COPA is not.
Very important distinction.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So essentially, that's COPPA. So when you're on websites and mobile apps and you see that your age is being asked for, your date of birth, it's usually because one of two reasons. Either the site operator or developer does not want to engage under 13 users, or they do want to engage, but they want to know what type of environment to provide the user. So if you're wondering why I'm always seeing, first of all, if you see a box that says check here if you're over 13, it's actually not compliant with COPPA. It's considered very misleading. So you have to ask it in a very neutral manner, which basically just says enter your age or date of birth. That's the most neutral and compliant way to ask of a user's age.
Greg, I'd like to throw this one to you. What kind of work do you do with privacy law? Can you paint us a little picture?
Sure. So my firm does a few things quickly. We help people with COPPA compliance. That's one thing we do. And working with the ESRB is one of the best ways, if not the best way, because they can get a safe harbor. That way, meaning if you have the ESRB seal, then regulators can't come after you in quite the same way. So we help people comply with COPPA. We also help people comply with advertising regulatory guidelines. We help people create privacy and data security programs, so audit the data in their company, classify that data, assign attributes to that data, help them with things like data lifecycle, and lastly, it includes things such as server optimization. I'm working on a program right now that we're going to save an international publisher $300,000 a year in server costs, because the truth is they didn't know all the data they had and how long they were storing it. I've helped people literally come to the realization that they had a warehouse somewhere that they didn't know they were paying for every year. So, I mean, things like that, that's the privacy and data security program. And then lastly, we do incident mitigation. So if someone leaves a laptop in a car and it happens to be an HR laptop, to you lose 1 million records, to your payment processor was hacked, to ransomware. So those are really kind of the three core things.
I'm just going to add to that. I think you'd be surprised how often site and website developers have no clue what their third parties are doing with their data or what their third parties' practices are. Oftentimes when we're auditing or monitoring websites or apps, and we'll say, did you know that this data is being collected on your behalf or being shared with this third party? So asking questions of who you're sharing data with, who's collecting data on your behalf and sending it back to you, you really need to know, because there is liability with regards to everyone who's touching and collecting that data.
And I'll add this. Outside of the video game industry, I represent a company that makes pens, P-E-N, right? Like you write with. And if I ask them to give me the manufacturing specifications associated with the pen, I will get something that comes back, it's this thick, the tensile strength, how it melts, all the wholesale cost of the ingredients, the shipping, etc. It's incredibly freakish. You go next door, now that's part of the privacy and data security audit, just talk to me about the data associated with the pen. You go next door to marketing and then you say, can you talk to me about who has access to your consumer data? And they will, honest to God, look at me 100% of the time and shrug their shoulders, and they will say, how can you know? Who would know? I mean, so it's a really different cultural thing. I mean, you could say, okay, well, where do you advertise and how do they track the data? Total shoulder shrug. And essentially every organization I've ever been inside, we hold marketing to different standards than we hold engineering, and the truth is they're different people. And it has interesting regulatory consequences.
So please help us out here. How does that relate directly to games?
Sure. So I'll give a couple examples. So COPPA, children's games, all children's games. Privacy and data security, we want to keep your payment information safe on microtransactions. We do not want to spam you with unsolicited email or email that you can't unsign up for, you can't unsubscribe for. We don't want to, as an industry, do behavioral advertising, which is a type of advertising that tracks you across sites or across devices without at least your notice and the ability to opt out. So those are the things. We want to avoid unfair and deceptive or creepy advertising. We want to keep your user data safe. We want to make sure that everyone involved with the forums, because you guys know a lot of forum moderators are volunteers, right? We want to make sure that we protect your most personal information from people that are not employees of the company or people that don't have signed agreements with the company. All of those things.
So now that we've established what that version or definition of privacy is, I think that a lot of the time when people hear the word privacy, they think of a definition that's quite different. And Lydia, would you like to talk to us about some, I guess, quote-unquote privacy issues that you've had in gaming?
Yeah, this is a bit about the harassment part too. My problem is I put myself out there as a personality in gaming, as not only as a player but as a female. So some people take it the wrong way. They do what's called doxing, which means they find out all your personal info and put it on the internet, hoping people will spam you, call you at home, come to your address. My sister has had to put her Facebook really under lock and key. She's not even involved in gaming because people think it's funny to do that. I've had people find out my parents' addresses, their phone numbers, they found out who I'm dating and they spam them. It's just all because I'm playing a video game online. And that's the kind of thing I want to start seeing developers take a stance on.
What would you say the average age is of the person that
That is
doxes
spamming
you?
it? Teenagers. Because that's apparently funny for them to do, but it's not funny for the rest of us. I've actually had someone try to what's called swatting, where they call in a false emergency to a police station saying there's somebody with a gun to their head in the house, and a SWAT team will show up. Luckily for me, I work for the federal police as a secretary, so they were like, is this real? Is this actually happening? No. Okay, good, glad we called first.
That's a really great question about age, and another question I have is how many below 13 people have you encountered in esports, if any?
You cannot compete in esports if you're under 16 years old, at least in the games that I'm involved in, because you're signing contracts and because a lot of organizations don't want to have 13-year-olds on stage. Because that's going to be interesting.
Yes. Can anybody speak to what kind of response has there been from lawmakers in reaction to the things Lydia has mentioned, the harassment, the privacy breaches?
Did you want more on the harassment, or do you want just a
Oh, please, yes.
So, I am the only female coach right now of a professional MOBA team. We're successful. We're out of Australia. And when I used to coach in South America, there's a site called Twitch. It's where you stream your games on. You just stream what you're playing, or they'll take your pro league games, have casters just like in the NFL, do your play-by-play interviews and show the game for fans. And I had this group of people that thought it would be funny to spam very derogative things about women in Spanish in the Twitch chat, which everybody picked up just because my team had a female coach, which was me. That happened every single day for 6 months. Every day. It got to the point where they would spam myself and my players in-game with it as well. I've had professional players go on social media saying Lydia slept her way to the top. And I brought that up with the game company that is in charge of adminning the rules for my game. And I said, you guys have got to put a stop to this. These guys are role models to younger players. They're like, we'll look into it, and nothing happened.
What about the platform? That seems like something the platform could control, because the chat comes from a person. You screenshot the chat and you say, hey, platform.
And also, they also do it on Twitter and Facebook and in-game.
Right.
So it's not just one platform, and if they ban their Twitch account, they make another one a few minutes later. And it's just, after getting that every single day for a year, it's hard, and it should not be like that. I want gaming to be welcoming for everybody. I don't care what your gender is, what your race, your orientation, anything. Gaming needs to be more welcoming, period. And if people are afraid to get to a competitive level because of that abuse, something needs to be done. I don't know if there's legislation, I don't know if game companies should be stepping in, but something needs to be done. It was at the point where we're at a tournament last year to qualify for Worlds. Paradigm, the team I own and manage, won against a team that everybody thought we wouldn't beat. The other team would not shake my hand. They walked by me on the stage, wouldn't even look at me. They shook all my guys' hands. It's live on Twitch. They wouldn't even look at me because they don't think I deserve to be there. There's just this online harassment culture that we need to figure out how to stop, because I'm lucky I can handle what they're saying, but we've lost a lot of women who don't know how to deal with that in different games. So
I think that part of the problem is that much of what you see online is what you see offline. So I've always been one to say, look, the behavior and the expectations of behavior shouldn't be any different when you're online, because people don't know how to manage themselves. And the problem is that right now, as many of you in the room know, the laws have not been able to keep up with the technology. And we're talking primarily, until there's federal laws, we're dealing on a state-by-state level.
Right.
So, and most of the states don't have online data breach or harassment laws. They usually just, whatever their law is for an offline environment, they try to apply to an online environment, which is obviously very difficult. And we're dealing with legislators who don't understand technology. Mm-hmm. So I think it does go back to what Greg was saying with regards to, the platform developers. But again, it's about creating a certain environment and guidelines that they actually have to follow through on. As much as we all love the technology, it also enables users to, okay, you shut down this account, just create a new one.
And I just think that is these other professional players that people are looking up to acting this way. I think the game company needs to make an example from these players and hand out punishments for acting this way. I think that'll start putting an end to this, because it's pro players that are writing these things in chat. It's not your 16-year-olds, it's professionals.
What would it take to make a bigger impact coming at this from the legal angle? Would there need to be more swattings? Would there need to be more death threats? Like, what do we have to do?
Something major has to happen.
Something major?
It's interesting. When I think about it, I think legislatively it probably will not occur, but I think it, and I know I'm not quite answering the question of what do I think it would take to get it to happen in terms of a cause and then a response. I'm going to skip to the next thing, like what would it take to get it to happen. So for instance, meaning internally. So for all of the games and platforms, and you know, I do work with a bunch of the publishers, you know, for instance, they don't have rampant cheating or, let's put it this way, exploitations associated with their microtransactions. And the reasons that they don't, they take that very seriously. And of course, people can go and create a new account and try to do microtransactions again. But there are IP blocking and cookies and tags and other things that you can, if you care enough about it, you can keep people from making a new account. Now, not 100%. I mean, I know that substantial games have dozens and dozens of people that work on this thing, but you're going to have to bring it to that level of concern through one mechanism or another.
Right, I think gaming companies would have to decide to make an investment, whether it's using, you know, two-step authentication when an account is created, tagging, you know, PII or users' data, so when they do create a second account, it's red flagged, whatever it is. But, you know, again, companies have to decide that this is worth making an investment on.
And some of it's league related too. I mean, if you think about, you know, European soccer had a problem for years and arguably still has a problem with it, for instance, with racism. But they've been handing out some substantial fines and suspensions associated with that. You don't just have to bite anybody anymore. You know, you can, everybody's like, what's soccer? If you use a, you know, a disparaging remark, you can be substantially fined. But yeah, it's gonna have to get there. And it's a horrible thing to say, but I think that institutionally or on an industry level, we don't care about it enough yet, which is obviously wrong.
It may also be that it may be something that happens big in the EU, because they're much more likely to, like we saw with Data in the Schrems case, they're more likely, I think, to take something on as opposed to us here. So it may be something, and we're dealing with a global market anyway, so under the new EU data privacy laws, harassment, things like that, I think if something happened over there, it would probably have greater ramifications.
So what about when I get threatened? I've actually had a death threat from a professional player and a rape threat from a professional player because we beat their teams. What should I be doing then about that? What's it going to take for this stuff to stop?
I would do the same. I mean, if somebody gave me a death threat, I would call the police. Yeah, it's like, you know,
right.
It's like, hey, here's a chat log. Bob said he wants to kill me. I mean, I don't see that that's different online.
Right, exactly.
I cannot imagine why that's different online.
Well, you don't see why it's different online, but we've heard countless stories. If you go to a police officer with death threats on Twitter, and the police officer says, "What's Twitter?"
Yeah. Right. That's my point, though, is that, you know, we're dealing with legislators and police officers who are not tech savvy, and the laws have not incorporated the way that we live in the technology. You know, they haven't advanced technology. Why? So that's the problem. So it is a form of educating, you know, from cops all the way up to the Hill.
Could we make tech savvy classes be mandatory?
We
I don't know that. Not us. I mean, I don't know.
Okay, so I did want to get around to talking about the necessity of privacy policies, and if it's true that no one is reading them, then why are they necessary? And maybe Dona could take us away on that one.
I would love to believe that people are reading them. I mean, I read them, and in part because I have to, but in part because I am just curious. But and I don't believe. I'm not delusional enough to think that all the privacy policies that I have read, anyone's reading them, and that's okay. I don't take it personally anymore. But the question is, if if users are not reading them, why must companies have them? And essentially, privacy policies and terms of use are contracts between the company and the users. So companies have to do the CYA. But at the end of the day, there's a reason why at the end of privacy policies, there is no checkbox saying I've agreed. When you read a privacy policy, it just said, look, if you're engaging on this site or you're using this game, we are presuming as the app developer or the website operator that you've read this. We have no way of proving that you have or that you have not.
Right.
Your use of the product is essentially your assent to the terms and the privacy policy, and we have to go by that. So if users are not reading them, I'm not sure what the implication is for the user or the company until something happens. So when a complaint happens or a user has a question, the first question for a company is going to be, well, in our privacy policy it states this or it states that. I'm a firm believer of not burying very vital information about how your data is being used in a privacy policy. I do believe in upfront disclosures, just-in-time notifications. So at the time data is actually being collected, making it very clear as to what we're doing with your data at the time of collection is really important, and not burying everything in a privacy policy. However, it doesn't negate having one.
And I'll say two quick things. The first is, people often out there in the world and even at game companies confuse terms of service and privacy policy in a really important way. Terms of service is a contract between you and the company. It's legally binding. Privacy policy is also legally binding, but it serves an entirely different purpose. The terms of use are, here's all of our disclaimers and all of our thou shalt nots and their protections. But a privacy policy, when done properly, should be the company's promises to you about how it will treat the data. Mm-hmm. So that's very different. A terms of service should be for the benefit of the company, or normally is for the benefit of the company. They're one-sided almost always. But a privacy policy should be for the benefit of the consumer in a descriptive sense. Now, and I'll say this about people reading them. I read a bunch too, I write a bunch, but I don't think all of you read them. I do think you read forums. And something that's interesting to me, particularly when you get a game that has 1 million players or 2 million players, there's some crazy people out there. And when you make changes to the privacy policy, they will highlight those changes in the forums and start a discussion around it. Mm-hmm. So that's what happens. So, we save up our changes when we want to make them in privacy policies, and we're not thinking about people reading the privacy policy explicitly. We're thinking about how is it set out in the forums. So if I were to say something really nasty in a privacy policy, it would come up. I mean, it would. I mean, think about a lot of your game developers think about the zombie clause in the lumberyard terms of service, right? I mean, that was some buried esoteric stuff, and it was highlighted day one and became a news story.
Well, and I think also a great example is what happened with VTech. As soon as the whole data breach happened, they updated their privacy policy to basically say, you parents are responsible for your kids. And for those of you not familiar with what happened with VTech, there was a huge data breach with regards to their data collection practices of parents and children under 13. So it turned out they had collected millions and millions of children's data without first obtaining parental consent, so they were in severe non-compliance with COPPA. They made an update to their privacy policy, which basically put the onus on the parent. So all of a sudden, you saw all these articles, news articles, and forum postings highlighting that explicit portion about how they made this so-called update to their privacy policy. So, I mean, Greg is completely correct. And I think also, we've done short-form privacy policy. So if you go in the ESRB rating app, or some of our member companies have short forms, and basically all it says is, straightforward bullet point language, what information is collected, who it's being shared with, and why it's being collected. And I think that those are the 3 points that most consumers are concerned with. And I think the why piece is what kind of is a connecting factor. Because if you know what information is being collected and who it's being shared with, why kind of connects the dots. So I always use the flashlight app as an example. Yeah. So, if a flashlight app is collecting your contacts or photos, it sounds crazy they're doing that, but if they tell you why they're doing it, it actually may make sense. You still may not want to download it, but at least they're telling you why they're doing it. So having the why piece as to why you're collecting data, I think is really important.
You don't want any surprises.
Right, no surprises.
So I think an interesting thing to do would be, Lydia, let's start with you. If you have any questions you would like to ask your fellow panelists, would you like to take this opportunity to do so?
Wow. Would you think in a terms of use, if we were to put down that you can't attack somebody because just treat somebody like
You're
that?
assuming they're being read.
Let's pretend people don't just hit accept.
They're in there. I mean, I
Right.
write tons of terms of use. I
Right.
guarantee you all the behavior you described to me is in 100% of the terms of use I've ever written. Now, then we go back to, do they really care? Do they
Yeah,
care enough
that's
to ban
exactly how do we make them
and keep them
enforced?
perma ban? Yeah, that it's in the language is in the document. And if you interview the top 20 publishers right now, they would put a woman on stage who would tell you how much they care about those things. And then, then you have to see, what actually happens day to day. I don't know. Here's my question to you. Do you think it's better or worse than 6 years ago?
I think it's honestly getting a bit worse because there's so much more ways to interact with people, and the esports is getting bigger, and there's more and more people getting involved, and unfortunately some games are what we call more toxic than others, and people are crossing over.
But for instance, doesn't and help me with this,
Sure.
but League of Legends is rewarding people for being pleasant these days?
There's only two companies that are taking a stance majorly, which is Riot, which is League of Legends, and Dota. Nobody else has really taken a hard stance on that, and that's what I want to push. Is I have had a president of a game company approach me and say, how can I get more women playing competitively? And I was like, you have to stop this. You need to promote the girls that are involved in the game by highlighting them and who they are. You can't just let people just insult everybody. And it's not just against girls. People are attacking people for their sexual orientation as well, some pro players, and they're like, you know what, I'm out, this isn't worth it. We've lost amazing girls, just like on Renegades. We've lost girls in different games because they can't stand up to this anymore. When people are spamming, there's a Hearthstone streamer named Hafu, I don't know if anybody follows. People spam demanding nudes from her all the time. She doesn't even have to be in the stream, and people are like, oh my god, Hafu nudes. Why is that okay? And how can game companies put an end to that? That's what I'm trying to figure out. That's what I've been pushing for about a year and a half, is how do we change this?
I think part of the problem also is the fact that this behavior is not just relegated to gaming environment.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening online across all environments.
Yes.
So I think it's a much bigger problem than just a gaming environment. It really does boil down to, and I say it all the time, it's like, how people are raised, quite frankly. So I think that it really boils down to how people decide that they want to portray themselves and be portrayed in an online environment. And I just think that people are so quick to be able to hide behind what they say and what they post in an online environment without thought of consequences.
Yeah.
And we've created that's our culture now. That's the environment that we live in. So it's not just relegated to a gaming environment. And that's the unfortunate part of the technology.
Right. Like, I'm on stage at the World Championship, and it should be a huge moment. It should be, this is what you fought all year for. Only thing people are writing in chat is fat girl over and over and over again. I'm like, we're on stage at the World Championship. I've been fighting 2 years of my life for this, and that's all people can say.
I'm sitting next to you and you're not fat. Let's start there too.
Oh, God.
Seriously,
Yeah,
a tragedy.
I just think game companies need to start saying, hey, you know what? Time to set some examples from these pros that are doing this.
How would they incentivize that and enforce that?
They can ban. There was a player last week in Smite permanently banned from competitive for at least a year because of harassment against other players. It was his 5th strike. He cannot compete for a full year. Worst part is he was the best player on his team, and they were probably going to go to DreamHack.
But why isn't he just a year for his 5th strike?
Right. Why isn't it a lifetime ban?
That's weird.
That should be something that should be looked in as well. Like, it's not taken seriously. It's just the culture.
I would like to ask Donna if she has a question she would like to pose to her fellow panelists. And if not, that's okay.
No, actually, I mean, Lydia just answered my question, kind of. So,
Oh, I'm psychic.
Yeah.
New talent. Yes.
Are you psychic?
All right, guys, some lottery numbers. 4.
Well, what was the question?
No, she just expanded on the whole issue of kind of, my question was, what has been done to date? So she just answered my question with regards to the latest violation.
Is there a hand in the audience we would like to take?
I
Yes,
just
please.
wanted to mention, when you said players being banned for like only a year as compared to like their entire lifetime, is player reform. Players are people, and people make mistakes. And I know that Riot will ban a player for a certain amount of time, and then after a year revisit their behavior to see if they're allowed to come back into the competitive scene. And I think that not only like cracking down on harassment, but allowing people that would be banned to let them come back into the scene if they've gotten better is super important, because we're not trying to like just say you're a bad person, go away. We're trying to say you're a bad person, you should be better.
This player that was banned, it was his 5th strike. Not warning strike. Your first one, 24 hours. Your second one, 24. 1 week, 3 weeks. This was his 5th time. To get a strike, you need at least 30 reports. So he's been reported a lot.
So over what period of time, though, was the 5? Do you know? Like,
Lifetime. You're a professional player. You have 5 strikes against you.
So over what
was
period of
very
time did he
well
get those strikes? Like, was it months or
I
years?
don't know. They will not release that much. He hasn't been in the pro scene very long. He's only been in there for about 6 months.
So let me try to, into the microphone, repeat what that really excellent point was from the audience, and I'm paraphrasing quite a lot, but a big point to that is that a lot of these pro players are in their early 20s, maybe late teens, or in their adolescence, and you were talking about player reform or like rehabilitation or changing their behavior over time, and teenagers definitely change their behavior. Their brains haven't fully developed yet.
We hope. We hope.
Oh, well, we hope. We hope.
I'm hopeful.
So that's an excellent point, and I definitely wanted to pose that to the panel as well, as these players are teenagers and they change. And so how does that look, and what kind of effect does that have overall, and how forgiving should we be?
Well, it's interesting. I was, finding out that most retire by the age of 23. A year ban
That
is
they retire. But
retire. Yeah, well, no, but I mean, if a year ban when you're only going to be able to play pro until you're 23 is a lot. I mean, which is I guess it's more substantive than I was perhaps originally considering, because none of these people are playing at 35, 36.
I'm 28.
yeah, there's no hard
Except
stop
for
at
you.
23.
Well, there's no hard stop at 23, but you said that most stop, right? I mean, it was
majority.
you that I was listening to.
Majority, because they move on to other things in life.
Right.
Some do, except
And
for
you,
34-year-olds.
as I understand it, you kind of biologically lose it, right? Like you're not a gunslinger anymore at 41.
No. I mean, if you are, have fun. Good luck.
Okay, so that does seem to muddy the waters a little bit, considering that there's a shift in personalities or hormones as the players continue to grow. But Lydia, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the personalities of the players and why it can be toxic or problematic?
I'll give another example. When I first started coaching in Smite, there was this one player from Egypt. It's the thing about Smite, it's a MOBA, it's 5 versus 5. It's strategy, building, and it's also reaction time and skill shots. He did a really, really bad build. Like, it made 0 sense, he didn't do anything on it, and we lost the scrim, the practice. So I said, okay, you should probably build this way, not that way. He's 16 years old, turns around and goes, I don't have to listen to you, you're a woman, and I'll never respect what you say. I left the team immediately. Because I deal with Australia, who are awesome, those guys are awesome, but I also deal with Europe, and there's a lot of different cultures that don't see people as equal. Right now, on the internet, people could say whatever they want because it is, quote, trolling, quote, it's just a joke. And they seem to forget that there's another person on the other side of that username. Because it's easy to just type something, hit enter, and just, look what I said. It's just the culture right now, unfortunately, for a lot of teenagers. And I don't know why that is. I want to find out why that is. But the people I work with are mature. We don't do that. I don't let my guys do that, but people do it to them. It's just like...
And what about the fact that some of them play esports as a career in place of going to university or in place of getting a first job in a corporate setting?
A lot of the North American players, they don't do this. It's mostly a lot of European players. I don't mean that to all of Europe. My Paradigm boys, they're European, they're amazing, they're great guys. But there's just different cultures that don't see everybody on the same level. And there's a lot of teenagers that for some reason don't understand authority and don't understand respect. And a lot of it is they've learned on a lack of respect. They do the same thing in school. My nephew has the same problems in his classes. It's just different now. And I don't know why it is.
I think you just said kids these days.
Well, I mean,
Uphill
they
and
call
snow
me mom.
both ways.
They call me paramom. All right? I'm 28. My life is over. I'm sorry.
Audience question.
So, well, it's more of a comment. Don't kill me. I think it's disingenuous to break this down to just kids doing it, because there's a lot of grown people who should know better who still do this. And I'm in my 40s and I still compete. So it's not just people who should, like, oh, they're young, they don't know better. These are grown people who know exactly what they're doing and do it intentionally and can cover their tracks. So I think that's something worth noting.
Did we want to use the mic so they can pick them up for
Sorry.
video?
Yeah, why don't you guys line
there's a
up
mic,
if you
guys.
don't mind, because we
No.
only have a few minutes left for questions.
And they'll hear you on the
Yes,
video.
go ahead and form a line at the mic in the center of the room. And just to recap the comment that was made just now, it's not just kids who are doing this. There are grown adults who know what they're doing, who are also doing online harassment and bullying, and they know how to cover their tracks, and it's a little bit more insidious than just, oh, they haven't grown out of that phase yet.
I promise you, though, that these are people who are bullies in their life, not just in an online environment. Personality-wise, this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Okay, first question.
Maybe this comes from my background as a litigator, but what do you think the capacity is for traditional tort law to remedy some of these things? I mean, as I was hearing some of the things that was happening to you, so especially the more egregious examples, I'm thinking intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation. Even if you're a public figure, you can certainly prove actual malice. If not, it's defamation per se. You wouldn't have to prove special damages. A lot of these things, you kind of check down the list and start imposing, some real liability on people to act as a deterrent. What are the challenges for taking that kind of approach as a curb to this kind of behavior?
I've looked into that, and the biggest thing that concerned me is, will it make it worse? Will other people be like, haha, she's gonna sue me or something? I've had articles written on me by Polygon, IGN, all sorts of places on the stuff that I've faced, and they mock it. They post the Polygon article over and over again, go, nobody talk to her, there's gonna be an article about you. So I think if I try to do something about it, it would be 10 times worse.
And there's the cost, right?
As well, yeah.
Brother, can you spare $10,000 to file a claim against, some doofus in Nowheresville with no assets?
Exactly.
So can we get more lawyers playing MOBAs and like in the chat room saying, hey, is anybody defaming you?
I'm defaming people in the chat room. No,
It's you!
No, it's not.
I'm looking for a lawyer. Anybody know where I can find
The
one?
first taste is free, right, guys? Next question.
My comments kind of twofold. One, I'm 18 and I interact in like these circles from people who are like 16 to people who are 40 and above, and like it's not just being a teenager that's part of this. At one point I was one of those teenagers. I acted just like that, and a big part of it that helped me kind of get better at it is education. And so in so many of these circles there is no education, and journalists, as I'm like trying to become a journalist, they need to work on that too. And I was wondering, like, why aren't there systems in place with these websites like Twitch and League and everything like that, where you can literally set someone to never interact with you again? Because so many of these tech companies are focused on moving forward. They don't think to take a step back and look at harassment. Twitch's competitor, Hitbox, has something called an IP ban, where you can ban someone by IP from chatting in your chat so that they can stop harassing you. But Twitch won't even help its largest, its core audience, like speedrunner Narcissa Wright, who recently transitioned, and she had an incident where she deleted her Twitch channel and stopped interacting on these sites because she was constantly facing harassment. despite having a team of moderators, despite trying to ignore it. So much of the discourse around this is, oh, you can just look away from the screen instead of actually moving forward. So why isn't there like legal precedent where you can take a screenshot of someone calling you a bunch of slurs in chat and you send it to a site and they go, oh, this is against our terms of service, we got a username right here, we can get rid of it.
Excellent question, in my opinion.
Sorry if I...
I'd like that. I mean, no, they can do it. Yeah, I mean,
Right, and I think that that's a question for each individual company as to why they choose not to do it or how they choose to use the resources that they have. And I mean, literally that's a company by company issue right now.
And the other thing I guarantee you the companies would say too is they do it and they can produce volumes.
By evidence, right?
Yeah, volumes of evidence that they're doing it. And I mean, I know that they are doing because sometimes I help them do it. But the thing is, there's just so much of it. The question, no, they would say they care, and they would. And they would say they banned, and they do. But the question is, why aren't they doing it better?
Or what appears to be enough of it, because the proliferation is just so immense. So how do you keep up with it?
And for some people, it's a game to get blocked. You block somebody and they put it on Twitter like, ha, look at me, I got blocked. And then everybody else joins in because it's now the cool thing to do.
And just one more thing, like, why is it not legally required for like companies that are in spaces that promote harassment to provide tools for an individual to absolutely get that person out of their life? I know it doesn't exactly work like that online, but something like blocking someone on Twitter, they can just log out and still see your stuff. They can still send you tweets that'll show up in third-party clients and things like that.
Probably too much work.
Well, I mean, there's no legal obligation to do, there's no law that says companies have to do that. So again, it comes down to how companies want to run their businesses and what kind of tools they want to provide. So I mean, I think it's a valid question, but again, I think it's, companies will say that they're probably doing their best.
I also come from a litigation background, and I don't know how easily I would file a complaint, but I could at least see an argument for people like Lydia being a third-party beneficiary of an end-user license agreement and setting up a rather large class action against an individual company that way. Leaving aside the mechanics of such a suit, what I'm wondering is if, as a matter of policy, it might be most effective to put those kind of incentives on companies to police what goes on within their games. It was discussed earlier, the companies, their bottom line is profit. If they have a financial incentive to change the behavior of the players of the games that they actually own, might that affect change? And might that be more effective than waiting for legislation or cultural change?
Well, that would require legislation, what you're saying. Oh, I mean, you're saying you're trying to make the game companies liable for what happens on their systems, or the platforms liable for what happens on the systems?
If, for example, Lydia,
a class action
people like her
suit,
are in a class action, we're listed as a third-party beneficiary of an end-user license agreement.
But that's a law review article. I mean, let's be honest, right?
And against leaving aside the mechanics of such a practice and that kind of activist litigation, assuming it could be done, does it make sense to put that kind of burden on the companies to police? Would that actually be effective?
I think it would be. I mean, I think about the TCPA, which is, essentially text message marketing law that has a private right of action, which often becomes a class action. And that, a few $10, $20 million cases, and all of a sudden you really have people's attention. So I don't, like you say, I don't know if it could happen the way you describe it, but certainly, class action liability gets people's attention. Don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I agree.
Lydia, is super impressive. Everything that you've been through, it's been terrible. And you've said that you've lost players because of it, and people have been discouraged because of all the harassment. What is it that you attribute your ability to persevere and stay empowered and become successful in this space despite what you've been through? Because, of course, the things that you're discussing here today, there are actions going forward to change them, but that change is slow. And in the meantime, how do you get people to still play the game and stay empowered and not get discouraged when things like this happen? Because you've had successes and you have persevered through all this. So.
That was an excellent question, Keisha. Thank you.
I have an amazing support system around me. They understand what I'm trying to do, and they understand how hard it is on me to do this. It's not easy. There's a lot of times where I just want to give up, or I just break down, because it gets to you after a while. If someone says the same thing over and over and over again, no matter how tough you are, it gets to you. But I get messages from girls and from everybody saying, I got into gaming because of you. And I realize we need somebody to push that boundary. So many people have given up. And I realize that if I have to take this stuff to make it more welcoming for everybody, I will. Somebody has to do it. And it hurts and it's terrible, the things that are said to me. People don't understand the effect it has when people keep saying things about you. But somebody has to be able to do that. When we were at the World Championships, I got stuck signing autographs for 4 hours. And I didn't realize till then the difference it's been making going to panels like this, speaking up online, doing these interviews, making people realize, hey, I'm here, I'm taking this, we can do this together. And I'm not trying to fight for just girls. A lot of people see my article in Polygon that was written on me, thinks I'm just being a feminist. No, I want it to be welcoming for everybody. I don't care what gender you are, sexual orientation, race, anything. If you're good enough, you should be able to prove it with your results, period. You shouldn't have to take these results. You shouldn't have people say, oh, you're pretty good for a girl, or hey, you slept your way to get to where you are, because that's not true. So what keeps me going are these messages and these people coming up to me at events saying, hey, I started doing this because of you, and that's what keeps me going.
So what advice would you give to other gamers that have dealt with harassment, small or large scale? Like a person like me, I speak to a lot of gamers, and if they're discouraged, what can I take from your situation and tell them to keep them, motivated to stay in this space and motivated to act so that change will occur?
If you're doing something and you love doing it, don't let anybody else bring you down. If it makes you happy and you like doing it, then do it. If people are hating on you, if people are saying things about you, you're doing something right that's making them uncomfortable. You should not feel guilty because other people can't handle what you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Does anybody else feel a round of applause coming on from that?
Considering the pros and cons, if you had the resources, would you implement informational programs to help educate players? Yeah, that's my question.
That's actually something I suggested to Hi-Rez, which is the game company in charge of Smite, to do. Was at the start of every pro season, you have a lesson with players on what it means to have a sponsor, how you should act on social media and online, because you do have younger players or amateur players that look up to these guys. And I think that, hey, maybe if you do a mandatory session, have them actually pay attention for this one day, then maybe, who knows, maybe it will make a difference. Maybe it'll just be like, oh, I have to do this, whatever.
I think pros and cons was specifically what you were asking for.
I think some players won't take it seriously, and some players don't even show up to rule meetings because it's just, hey, I don't have to do that, I'm the star. So that could be the bad side, or they'll see it as them getting policed. Hi-Rez brought in a rule that there's a social media rule for how players are supposed to act. They do not enforce it, actually. I've never seen it actually enforced.
That's baloney.
Hi. We talked about the internet and harassment and how people can make one account after another to harass an individual. So that has to deal a little bit with anonymity in being anonymous. My view is in order to be able to tackle people and their activity in being anonymous on the internet, you have to make them more of a person, and that can come into the privacy statements of now you have an anonymous username that now becomes a real person, and then that person, you can search for their address, now becomes a real person at a different location, and then that becomes doxing. What is something that we as users of the internet who decide to put our full name out there rather than be an anonymous netizen. What can we do to protect ourselves?
Guys.
From what? I'm sorry.
From harassment, from being doxxed, from what this panel is about.
I've actually got an answer.
Go ahead.
Okay.
We have an answer from the audience.
Hi.
Hi.
Should I stand up?
Yes, please.
Yeah, do it.
Hi. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Tanya DePass. I started ID Diverse Games. But in order to keep yourself from being harassed, use Crash Override, go and scrub all your personal info, go to Spokio, go to other places and see how you're listed. Because a lot of times you sign up for things and you have no idea your information is out there. So Crash Override has a very good guide on how to do this and step by step. 2-factor authentication on all your social media, everything. Don't share things. If you run an organization, people should have individual accounts if possible. So go do a test, see how easy it is to Google yourself, find your address. If you ever had to give your social security number for something, applied for credit, go find out how how searchable you are. I can't say that word. But lock everything down, scrub your presence off the internet as much as possible, and then let people know if they email you, contact you online, how you want to be called, because people call me either by my name, my online handle, what have you. But if someone is really industrious, unfortunately they're going to find a way to do it, but make it hard for them, make them work for it.
Great, thank you very much.
Was there sort of a nugget in that question about maybe the pros and cons of the act of being anonymous on the internet, and if we took that away and everyone was not allowed to be anonymous on the internet, what would that look like, and what would the cons of that look like? Can anyone on the panel speak about that reality? Or alternate reality? Science fiction?
Yeah, I'm not even sure that that's possible, that's even feasible.
If they invented a virtual reality headset that you put on your face and you have to like microchip your way in order to use it to log into the massively online.
But I think that there may be some good arguments for remaining anonymous.
Of course.
So I think that that's part of the problem, is that you still need to have an environment where you can be anonymous, but one or the other. I don't think we're talking about black and white here.
Yeah, and I was thinking, or I keep thinking about Facebook, because originally it was supposed to be your real name, and then a lot of people went around that, and then in some European countries they got court orders that said that people, did not have to use their real name. They had sort of a right to anonymity. Yeah, I haven't been saying much on it because it just strikes me as enormously complex, and as you go toward one side or the other, you just have what I'll consider all these unintended consequences. And also, as you sort of progress in your career, depending on what you do, it's impossible to get entirely off the internet. I mean, there's pages of Donna Fraser, I'm sure. I'm sure there's pages of Donna Fraser. And like I mentioned before, having spoken on so many, video game panels, there's you can see me as a child on YouTube, it appears. And so it's really tough to get it all off.
Do we have another comment from the audience? How about over here and then back to the front?
It was just two really quick ones. The first thing that comes
could you do us a favor, go to the microphone so we
sure.
can record that?
And these are the last two?
Yes, these will be the last two.
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is, I'm sure you guys are aware they tried implementing this a few years ago. Blizzard did, the Real ID system, and that was,
Failure.
That went well.
a shitstorm would be putting it lightly. So we kind of have that interplay, how like Lydia was saying, like a cultural thing. So on the one hand, you have this company that's, I guess, attempting to address that. I'm not sure like the original purpose of that is. I think it was originally more of a like, hey, this is how we're going to build a community, versus, and then this is kind of what was originally my question is, what do you guys feel that perhaps it's more of a thing that companies don't want to get involved because they see it as a like, well, if we try to do it and we don't do a good enough job of it, then we're going to get sort of, dumped on. Sort of like like an immunity clause, so to speak, like, we're hands off, so we're not responsible, and once we do get, once we do start trying to do something, you know, then it's on us. I'm wondering maybe that interplay is sort of at play.
I don't know why, honestly. I don't know if it's just too much work for them to really jump in and try and make a hard stance.
Yeah, there's also a cost factor here because we have encouraged a lot of companies to use two-factor authentication when people are creating accounts, especially when you're dealing with children. So we want to make sure that if a child is signing up for something and they're getting parental consent, that the person who claims to be the parent is at least who they claim to be. So doing two-factor authentication or doing knowledge-based authentication questions is something that some companies are moving towards, but it's extremely costly to do. So again, I think companies need to make a decision.
And let's also not elevate these places above what they really are. I mean, it was particularly at the turn of the century, it was a very big deal to talk about, the governments of virtual worlds, which are really just about 2 gin and tonics away from your question. Okay?
I need a gin and tonic.
Yeah, okay. No, we drank bourbon last year. It was mixed this time.
Well, I just sidetracked the call.
I know. I was thinking about, you talked about the way people's impulse control changes from their teenage years. I think that mine's developed this way, unfortunately. But don't give them too much credit, is what I'm trying to say, because at the end of the day, they're malls. That's all they, at best, they're malls. And, we need just like functioning security to get people in and out and keep them clean. It's not. I'm sorry to say, after decades of seeing it, I don't think there's any real political theory elements at work.
That's a good analogy. Thank you for that. And in the interest of time, I think let's save your last question and you can come up after the fact. And to trying to keep things on schedule, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. So thank you. Let's give a hand to our panelists.